Yeah, so 16 years I've been doing bees. I started out like probably everybody. I started out with 2 hives. And then, after the first year I had 1 hive. And so then I got 2 more and I had 3. And the next year I had lost 2 and I had 1 hive. And the next year I got 4, and I lost 2, it just goes on, right? And so, that's about the time they started really starting to understand the mites and what effect they were having on the bees. And I don't have it in here, but I worked for the Natural Resources Conservation Service for 35 years. So I got a little bit of a scientific background in me. And so I kind of really dove all in, and I read everything I could about mites and bees and the life cycle of both. And one thing, if you don't take anything away from today's talk, is that you got to understand the life cycle of the bee and the life cycle of the mite, because they're symbiotic and they follow one another. And I'll talk about that tonight. I started out, again, like a lot of beekeepers, don't want to use chemicals, want to do it natural, don't really understand that there's chemicals to be used. So we just kind of do the best that we can. And I tried all that stuff and figured out that it really didn't work. So, really, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but how many people lose hives almost every year? Could you put your hand up, okay? I only see a couple. So how many people don't lose any hives? You got 0 hive loss, okay, for more than 3 years in a row. Okay, that's fantastic, because that doesn't happen very much. And I'll talk about the rest of this in a minute, but the national average hive loss is about 40% per year nationwide, 40%. Now, I listened to a presentation last week, or 2 weeks ago, from a lady, and she was from a university, and she was talking about the economic threshold to treating bees. They got this, that's what the university uses, when you use pesticides. The economic threshold. When do we use pesticides? Is when we're starting to get an economic loss that is greater than what we can afford. Now, I don't understand how 40% is an economic threshold. That's just crazy to me. If you think about it for a minute, what if we lost 40% of our dairy cows, 40% of our chickens? What if we lost 40% of our dogs, 40% of our population? I mean, it's not acceptable in any fashion or form in any type of commodity that is produced in the United States except for beekeeping. That's just crazy to me, and it's unacceptable to me. So I've really put a lot into trying to understand this and get to the bottom of it, and I think I've come up with a system that works very well for me, and I'm just want to share some of it with you. So we're going to start with varroa mite biology. And I asked him, what do you want? Beginners, intermediate, advanced? And I can see there's some advanced people in here. I don't know how many beginners there are, but I always like to talk about the biology of the bee first and the mite. So let's see, Jake, how do I get this to go forward? Okay. All right. So one thing I like to point out that a lot of people don't really understand is that the honeybee is not native to North America. We got thousands of native bees in the United States, but the honeybee has been imported. And so I like to kind of look at honeybees as just like any other animal commodity on the farm. That's what I look at it as. It's just another item like a horse or cows or chickens to be raised. Okay. The bees, we know they can survive on their own in the wild, but in a box, that's not their natural environment. As beekeepers, we're trying to keep them from swarming. We're trying to steal honey from them, or else we're trying to steal frames from them and sell new bees. So we're raising them just like we would be raising cattle or poultry. And there's other, almost all the diseases and pests that have been brought into the United States that we find in the bees have been imported. So that's just something that we bring upon ourselves. So I said bees are like livestock, they're or pets, okay? So I just like everybody to understand that if you have a dog or a cat, people spend hundreds of dollars on their pet every year, bring it to the vet. I mean, you're getting rabies shots, you're getting, worming medicine. I know you're doing heartworm treatment for your dog. I mean, we wouldn't think nothing about bringing our dog and spending $500 or $600 to get it taken care of at the veterinarian. So it's the same thing with the bees. They've got this parasite and we need to treat it. We need to feed the bees and we need to manage them. The days of just putting the bee box in the backyard and collecting honey and in the middle of summer are over. We started out with the trachea mites. That was a big deal, and it seems like the bees actually kind of evolved around that a little bit. Some of the chemicals that we use actually kill trachea mites. But now we've got the varroa mite, and the bees have not really successfully evolved around that thus far. If you read Tom Seeley a little bit, he did an experiment on trying to see how long it would take for the bees to genetically modify themselves to be mite resistant. And so he put a bee yard out in the middle of nowhere, isolated, and didn't treat. And the first year he lost 90% of his hives. So if you can stand that, I mean, you know, you could get somewhere in a bee yard to get bees that are mite resistant, but he struggled with that for a number of years. I don't think he's got the silver bee yet. There are some folks that have some bees that are hygienic, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the varroa mite is actually named the Varroa destructor. That's the scientific name, and is perfect for that particular parasite. It's now known to be the #1 enemy of the bee, of the honeybees that we have in North America. And so we're going to just talk about them as mites. I'm not going to use this thing. And there's the little mite. If you haven't seen them before, it's tiny, about the size of a pinhead. It's an insidious little creature. It has all kinds of little appendages on its body to survive submerged, exposed, crawling on the back of the bee. It's just kind of an amazing little scary thing. It looks ugly. It's got little hooks on it. Yep, the snorkel where it can breathe, being submerged. I asked to borrow that and got approval. This is what it looks like on a bee. And the frustrating thing that I have with people when I ask them about, you know, did you treat for bees, your bees for mites? And they say, well, I looked and I didn't see any. And I could tell you that you could look and look and look and not find these little mites on a bee. Usually they're up underneath where the bee can't get to it, or like that perfect spot on its back, but you're just not going to look in a box and see them. That's just not how you're going to find them. So this is, they actually start down in the cell before the bee emerges. The actual mother, I call it well, I don't call it, but they call it the foundress mite. The mother mite crawls right into the cell right before it's capped. It's all timed out perfectly. And then she goes in there and lays anywhere from 2 to 5 new ones. And so when the bee hatches out, it comes out, the other mites come out. The mother foundress mite comes out and she just goes right back into another cell that's ready to be capped. The other ones roll around a little bit. They need to be matured and fertilized, but they don't take very long before they're going to go into cells themselves. So, I mean, it's been proven time and time again that the #1 loss of beehives is from the varroa mite. And a lot of it is basically hobbyist beekeepers that really don't understand what's going on in that hive, and they don't take the steps to manage for it. So it's like a tick. And if you can imagine it, for us, it'd be the tick about the size of your fist stuck on your back. That's what the bee's crawling around with. And it actually sucks out the fat lipid or liver lipids of the bee itself. It feeds on just like any parasite does. It's feeding on the bee itself, but it also transmits viruses. There's 8 prevalent viruses in Kentucky. There's over 20, but there's 8 of them that are very prevalent, and the mite carries those. You know, it's kind of like a mosquito eating something and then going somewhere else and poking a hole. And they crawl on from one bee to the other. They go from, somebody said, from hive to hive. They'll actually hitchhike. They'll get off on a flower. They'll get on another bee, and they'll go back to a different hive. The bees, we don't really think about this. I was just reading an interesting article about drifting. There's about at least 20 to 30% drifting in your bee yards, which means bees that come out of that hive go into that hive. And that hive over to that hive. And they drift farther than we think they drift. And not only drift from hive to hive in your apiary, but also drift to other hives in other people's apiaries. So that's how they get spread around. Just so somebody says, well, I don't have any mites in my bee yard, and I'm not going to end up getting any because I don't have any, but that's just not going to happen. It's just a matter of time. The other interesting thing is that as the varroa mite and the viruses weaken the bees, the entire hive now is infected. I mean, you know, whether you believe it or not, think about like COVID. You know, here we're a population, we're a bunch of sick people that's walking around. That's what's happening in that hive. And it starts to stress the bees. They're not going to be as functional. They're not going to work as well. They actually give off a smell. That hive gives off a smell, and that smell actually attracts beetles. The beetles can smell a stressed hive up to 5 miles away. So the beetles, I see a lot of people spend a lot of time putting stuff on the ground and stuff like that. They've done a lot of research. The beetle lays an egg. The egg hatches out. You got a little larva, looks like a maggot, and it crawls out of the hive, goes into the ground, and pupates. If it hits the ground and somebody puts a piece of plastic down there, it just crawls across the plastic till it can get to the ground that it needs to go around and pupate. So they've actually had them crawl across parking lots in the summertime and survive. Now, I've kind of experimented with that myself on my front and the road out front, and they don't do real well on hot surfaces. So I kind of question that particular research. But the point of it is that it's not the beetles that hatch out from the ground and fly back up into the hive. It's the ones that come from up to 5 miles away. Once the beetles get in there and they start taking advantage of the opportunity, they actually have yeast on their body that gives off smell as well, and it attracts even more beetles. And they say that can be smelled for more than 6 miles away. So now you got all these beetles coming into the hive. That's why they're getting in there, and a weak hive's got more and more beetles, and they evaluate that hive, and then they just explode, and they just decide to lay thousands and thousands of eggs. And if you've ever seen one fail from beetles, it's quite sickening. So we can pretty much think that almost every hive has varroa mite. It could be 1 or 2, could be 500, but they're going to populate themselves over a several-month period. And I'll talk about that a little bit more detail. And it's that scale, you know, and that's what makes them be able to really overwhelm a hive so quickly. The bee-informed partnership can kind of tracks this annual hive loss by surveys, and you can see what I was talking about earlier, about a 40%. So that's not my numbers. That's the numbers that's being collected over the entire United States, kind of showing summer losses, winter losses, and then the annual loss. Normally, winter losses are more than the summer losses, but total in the year, it's 40%. This is just a study that kind of looks at the viruses and the prevalence of the viruses over time. And you can see that there's more and more viruses that are becoming more and more prevalent in our beehives. And almost every beehive, they say, has some level of a virus or viruses. The form wing virus is one of the most common. And a healthy beehive can really outgrow some of those viruses, especially coming out of the wintertime into the spring. If you have a little bit of virus, they'll really power through that. But a weak hive can't outgrow the virus. And eventually the virus ends up killing the hive. So we're talking about mites. Now, what can we do? And that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit tonight. We always talk about integrated pest management anytime we deal with really pests and pesticides. And so for the honeybees, and for most organisms, it's the 4-tier approach. I mean, we're going to talk about cultural approach as an example, apiary location. Some people think if you put hives in the sun, a little bit warmer hive is not as friendly to the mite as it is in the shade. Physical, mechanical, some people believe screen bottom boards allow the mites to fall through if they get dislodged and go to the ground instead of falling in the hive and crawling on back onto another bee. There's some biological controls that really aren't quite available to us yet, but there's some research that's going on. And then genetic stock. There are some of these mite biter stock from Purdue that they actually chew on the legs of the mite, and all it takes is a chew or two, and apparently the mites will die. And then there's some genetic stock that can sense that there's a mite in the cat brood and will go in there and pull that brood out and throw it away. I've kind of dabbled in that a little bit. It's a little bit of work in progress too, because you're always having to requeen with that particular genetic stock, and it's very expensive. And it's not really economically available. It's not readily available. You got to get on a waiting list and get way early in ordering that kind of stuff. Chemical control. So that's probably the thing that's the most available to us that we know that works, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about that. There's got miticides that really are a pesticide, and then we've got some of these natural type of items that are used, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then you know, things like essential oils and powdered sugar and that kind of stuff. That's what I started with, by the way. And in the long term, it doesn't really work very well. But what we want to think about is a systematic approach to the mite treatment. There's not one silver bullet. Everyone got really stuck in this thing thinking that all they needed to do was treat the mites one time. And that's a big mistake, because the mites are in there all the time. And you're not going to get rid of enough mites with one treatment. Especially, like I like to tell people, the bees and the mites are not on your schedule. And so what happens, we're saying, well, we're going to do our treatment. You know, our best time to treat, you're going to hear me talk about, is July or August. And next thing you know, well, you know, you got sick, or you went on vacation, you didn't get a chance to treat your mites, or your daughter's getting married. I mean, people tell me that kind of stuff. You know, all kinds of things come up, and you missed your treatment window for that particular treatment you're going to treat. So you decide not to treat. And then, you know, you end up with an 80% hive loss. Yeah, same thing. Yeah. They're not waiting on you, I can tell you that. And there's a lot of effort or emphasis on sampling and mite count before and after treatments to see whether it's effective, number one, or whether you should test to see whether you need to treat, number two. You're going to see that I got a little different perspective on that. So when to apply treatment. And I'm going to talk about this in more detail, but late winter, early spring, that would be right now. Before the honey flow, January, February, mite counts are low, but a knockdown will pull the mites even lower. And as Jake said, the bees are already ahead of us on that. Really, the only treatment you could have used would have been oxalic acid. And I would have used that. I did use it in January. So that little window's missed. The second one would have been Apivar, which is the little plastic strips that you stick in there. And that's a 46-day treatment with a waiting time before you can put your supers on, or it's a 42-day treatment. So at 56 days, that's 2 months. Too late already now to get that going, because you're going to be needing to put those supers on in a couple of weeks just to get, as someone said, it's bee space. They're hatching out, would you say, 3 frames of bees? They only got the same box. I mean, I'm looking at mine and I got 6 and 8 frames of bees in there that are capped. Yeah, I need to get them out just as soon as this next cold snap's over. You got to use the appropriate treatment for the temperature, and I'm going to talk about that. And that's another mistake people use. They go down to the bee place, they buy what's available because they waited too long. They say, oh, somebody told me I went to this training and I need to treat my bees. Well, the only thing we got is this. Okay, that's what they buy. They have no idea that that's not going to work that time of year, or it's too hot and they're going to end up killing half their bees. So I want to talk about that in a little bit of detail. There's very few chemicals that can be used when the honey supers are on the hive. So you have to time it out. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. The next time is early summer. And Randy Oliver, if you get the American Bee Journal, that's a great journal. And if you get it digitally, you can look at past issues. I think you go back 3 or 4 or 5 years. And so when I retired, that's the first thing I did. I subscribed to American Bee Journal, and I went back and read 3 years worth of issues. And Randy Oliver had a really good thing. Every month, he basically carried out the life cycle of the bee and then the life cycle of the mite for 12 months. And that's really, I learned quite a bit from Larry Oliver. He's a big beekeeper in California. He runs 1,000 beehives in almonds, and he does a lot of research in his beehive that actually research that supports the beekeeping industry to come up with new treatments and new treatment methods for mites. So I think that's pretty cool. So he talks about trying to get treatment early in the season, you know, get the mite count knocked down. Okay. And if you do that, and then you can't get to your regular treatment in July or August, you've bought a little bit of time because you've already done some treatment. So that's kind of my theory. Early summer, June, that's when I like to do it. And I'll talk about it in more detail. Right after the main honey flow, actually the honey flow is still going on. And I use Mite Away Quick Strip because that's the only effective chemical that can be used when the honey supers are on. or some people might try to remove their supers and try to treat and put them back on, but that's just waste. I wouldn't definitely not do that. Mid to late summer. Really, it's going to be end of July, early August. That's going to be the most critical time for mite treatment, and I'll show you why in just a second. Well, here it is. Here's one of them right here. So we're coming out of the winter time. You see February, we got our bee population, which is in the blue, and our mite population is which in the red. And you can see our bee population peaks in June. And, then we start entering our dearth. So the bees start ramping down on production, but the mite population is still ramping up. And so that's what happens. The bee population goes down, the mite population goes up, and the mites overwhelm the bee. There's too many mites in the hive for the bees to stand it. So now you just got a mite on almost every bee, sucking the fat lipids out, transmitting viruses, weakening that bee. Two things are going to happen. That hive's going to collapse, or it's going to be gone. Okay? It's just not sustainable. So this is kind of a little math game that I play where we talk about the foundress mite that crawls into the brood chamber and lays, let's just say in this instance, 2 eggs on the back of the pupa. It could lay 1, it could lay 5. We already know that. And so later, 3 mites emerge, 2 on the back of the bee and the foundress. So we go from 1 to 3, we go from 3 to 9, we go to 9 to 27, 27 to 81, 81, 253 mites in a 16-week period from 1 foundress. Okay. And so I'll do some more math. 30,000 bees. The economic threshold, the treatment level is 2%. That's 2 mites per 100 bees. Is the scientists are telling us that is an acceptable level. That's 600 mites. At 10%, that would be 3,000 mites. And if you have a 50,000 beehive in the summertime, you're talking about 1,000 mites at 2% and 5,000 mites at 10%. So not Randy Oliver, I forgot his name. Hopefully it's on there next, but he'll tell you that if you got 10%, your beehive's dead. You just don't know it yet. Okay. What's that? No, the guy that used to write in the American Bee Journal on the question and answer thing. Who? No. Jerry Hayes. Jerry Hayes. He was the editor for American Bee Journal. American Bee. He is editor of American Bee Journal now. He was the bee culture. Yes, but he was the state apiarist in Florida for a number of years. But real
quick, this 2% 5 years ago was 3%.
Yeah.
10 years ago was
4%. It was yeah.
There was a time when
so that's I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to say that. It's not on my slide, but that's exactly right. 4 years ago, it was about 4%, 4 mites per 100. That was acceptable. And they realized that wasn't acceptable. It wasn't working out. So they went to 2. I'm here to tell you today that 2% is not acceptable. 500, 600 mites in my beehive is not acceptable. Is 2 fleas on your dog acceptable in your house? Is a tick on the back of your cat acceptable? No. I'm telling you that the 2% threshold is not economically sustainable if we're losing 40% of our beehives in the United States every year. How is that sustainable? So I've come up with my little system that is not going to accept that. Okay. And so if you fall treatment, a lot of people, you read a lot of this on Facebook, they wait till the fall to treat. And they're in there with their oxalic acid, gassing their bees every week. I'm treating my bees, I'm treating my bees. I see time and time again people who write in and say, my bees died in January. The cold got them. And I'm like, no, the cold didn't get them. What did you treat with? Oh, I used oxalic acid, 5 times in October. If you waited till October to treat your hives for mites, you're too late. Okay, that hive is already dead in October. You just don't know it until January. That hive has already been contaminated with viruses. All those bees are living in there together in the wintertime. They're all in that little cluster with those viruses, and those mites are still, had already transferred that virus. You might have shot them with oxalic acid and killed the mite, but the bees still have the virus. And so what happens is some of those viruses kill the bees in a matter of weeks, but most of them are a matter of months. And so you keep having bee loss, the bees are dying, and the cluster gets smaller and smaller, and we get one of those 10-degree nights or two of them in a row, and the beehive died. And people say, oh, the cold killed my bees. Well, the cold actually did that night kill your bees, but that's not what killed your bees. It's because you didn't treat your bees for varroa mites. Okay. And that's what killed them, the varroa mites. That the cold just happened to be the final factor. So, and then the worst thing is, you do everything right, and then your neighbor don't treat their hive collapses. Your bees go over there to rob the honey out, and they pick up the mites. That's kind of another way that the mites, usually parasites don't kill their host like that, but these have evolved in such a way that they figured out if they kill their host, they can get themselves transported back to not 1, 2, but 3 or 4 hives. And so that's how they've learned to expand themselves. I mean, I don't know if they can really think about that, but that's how this thing has perpetuated itself. Okay, so now you've got all these mites in your hive, and you thought you did everything right. So, when do you stop treating? So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And so that's a dead out. And I always like people talking about, oh, I have my bees all crawled in there. Those are all bees down in there. They crawled in there because they ran out of food and they starved to death. No, that's a very good example of a collapsed hive from varroa mites.
Jack, please cover the bill over there. Before you get too far away from first treatment of the year, development of mite strips in June. Let's talk about this year, for example. We are running 3-4 weeks ahead.
Oh, yeah.
So now are we talking possibly May instead of June this year?
Possibly. Yeah. Yep. You're very good point. It's a decision's got to be made because it's crazy this year. Okay, so sampling, it kind of helps determine the mite level. And, depending on time of year, they say 2 or 3% acceptable level. I'm telling you that it's not. 3% is acceptable when the bees are building up in the springtime, is what they say. 2% or more any other time of the year is too many. I like to tell people, if you're afraid to treat, you're afraid of the chemicals, if you don't do anything else, at least sample your hive for mites so you know what you got in there. Now, if you know that you got a 10% mite load and you decide not to treat, then that's a decision that any of us can make. That's a decision you can make, but knowing if you got a 10% mite count, that hive is going to die. So if you want to know that, then that's fine. Someone talked about a powder sugar shake. Some people don't want to kill their bees, and I get that. So if you don't do nothing else, at least do a powder sugar shake, and you can let your bees go and you can feel better about it. But really, the results are not that great, as the fellow in the back talked about. It could vary from 40% to 80% of what you would get on an alcohol wash. Alcohol wash is going to kill all the bees, but it's going to drop all the mites, and you're going to get a real accurate count. And there's several videos on how to do this on the Honeybee Health Coalition. I will tell you that I very seldom do a count. In my bee yards, I have 8 bee yards. 8 bee yards in 4 counties. Just little small yards, usually have 6 hives. I like to collect micro amounts of honey and keep it in small batches. That's how I sell my honey, in small batches of different tastes. And I had 6 hives on different apiaries, and I sampled them all. And every one of them had a different mite count. One had 0, one had 10. So if I would, they say, oh, you just need to really check one. So if I check one and it had 1 or 0, I say, oh, I don't need to treat. That hive's dead. So why would I? I'm going to treat them all. I don't really have time to go to I spend more time driving around my bee yards than I do, actually doing bee work. So I've got to do what I got to do in the time frame that I have. So I just treat on a regular basis. The researchers don't like that, but I can tell you that it works for me. So if you're going to do a count, my count, let's go through this real quickly. The first thing you do is try to, if you can, locate your queen, put her aside, put the frame aside, or put her in a cage. If you don't, and you want to collect, take a frame, and you're going to shake the bees to do a count, I always try, and I don't usually do this because I'm by myself, but if you could get 2 people to look at the frame, make sure the queen's not on her, because you're going to end up killing her. But you shake her in a pan like I've got there with the little broom in there, and then you dump them in the little, what do they call that thing? Easy check. It's $15. It's well worth the money. And then you shake your bees You dump the bees out, they're all dead. It's got a little plastic filter, and then you can look down in there and you can see the mite floating there. There's a little red looking, reddish brown thing about the size of a pinhead floating in there, and you can count it. And you're supposed to collect 300 bees. There's a little measuring thing on the inside of that cup, and the videos will show you how to do that. So then you, the number of bees, you got to, do your math, because, you need 100 bees. That's what the percentage is. So you got 300. So if you had 300 bees and you had 9 mites, that's a 3% count. Okay. 3% out of 100. So it's just kind of a powder sugar shake. The thing about the powder shake, you need to shake several times. Put it down, shake it, put it down, shake it, put it down. It's going to take you 10 minutes to do that. Which again, if you're trying to do several hives, and you're going to spend 2 hours doing sampling. Which it does make a mess. Yeah. The alcohol, or you can use soapy water. It's pretty quick. It kills them. About a minute of shaking, and you're done. And then you just got to let it let the liquid drain out. Let the mites go to the bottom. They'll sink to the bottom. So what's going to happen if you don't treat for mites? Well, they're going to, as already mentioned, they're going to feed on the fat body tissue, weaken the bee, transmit the viruses, the hive stresses, and you're going to attract beetles. So if the virus and the mites don't kill it, the beetles will. Or the wax moth, that's another predator. It's a secondary predator. The beetles are secondary predators. By themselves, they won't generally kill a hive that's healthy. It's a hive that gets weak. So the wax moth comes in later on. You can see the little moth on the ground in the summertime in the grass. I need you to load the next one up. They're little white moths, and they just fly into the hive. But usually, if you've got a lot of bees and the bees are healthy, they'll chase them out, and they won't let them lay any eggs in there.
I posted on our Facebook page like a week ago. There was one on my hive.
Oh,
on the front door of my hive a week ago.
really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's early.
Yeah.
Usually don't see them this early. I mean, it's crazy weather that way. You don't really see those until later when it gets warmer. Okay. And the bees are generally in the springtime and early summer, even if, you got mites in there, the population's growing. As long as you've got a good queen, the population's growing, and you've got plenty of bees in there to keep the wax moth out. So you usually don't see a wax moth intrusion until into the summertime. Late summer is when they're going to come in. Another thing I was telling them at dinner is that something else that I've learned recently is that your queen is really important. I mean, we all know that the hive can't function without a queen, but a good queen. I raise queens. I sell some queens, and this year I raised a bunch for myself. I did a late raising of queens in August because we still had a pretty good flow, and there was still a lot of drones in my area. Most people tell you that's too late, but I chanced it. I wanted to try it out and see how it worked. And I requeened all my hives that had any suspect. I mean, there was queens in there, they were laying, but I had other hives that were doing just phenomenal. And so I had these extra queens, didn't cost me anything. And I just replaced all the queens that even halfway wasn't carrying their weight. And this is the first year, and I've been 15 years. I've got hives, some hives that I've had for 10 years. I mean, you lose some, you roll over some, you do split, but I've actually had some for over 10 years. But this is the first year with I had 35 hives. I lost 0 hives this year. But part of it, not just my Varroa treatment, but it has to do with the fact that I think that I requeened hives that had weak queens. And so they were able to build up to go into the wintertime. You guys understand that you need your winter bees to be produced in August and September and a little bit of October. The winter bees have to live for 6 months. So they're a little bigger. They have more fat lipids. They're just a tougher bee. And so if you don't have a good queen in there that can turn that hive over and get ready for the winter with winter bees, then you go into the wintertime with not enough winter bees, and the hive just can't survive. So that's another hive failure is a bad queen. So non-chemical treatment, and when I started, and most of us probably tried a lot of this stuff, the hive placement, I can tell you I have hives in the shade all day long, and I have hives in the sun all day long. I try to get, if I'm gonna work the bees in the morning time, I want them to be, in the shade. If I'm gonna work them in the afternoon, I want them to be in the shade. So some of my bee yards are kind of like that. Some of them, I don't have that luxury, but I don't see any difference. and mite loads, or whether in the sun or whether in the shade. Same thing with beetles. I see a lot of people talk about if you put your hives in the sun, you won't have as many beetles. I can tell you the worst hives that I ever had, I acquired from somebody else. They were in the process of failing from beetles, and they were in the sun. So that by itself doesn't do anything. Screen bottom boards, you got to have the right screen bottom. If you get screen bottoms that are big in size, the wax moths and the beetles, the young beetles, both will fly right up into the hive from the ground. So that's something else that I learned. I don't have any screen bottoms anymore. They cost too much. You got a lot of beehives. They don't last as long, so mine are all solid bottom boards. Drone cell foundation. I can't imagine why you would let your beehive waste all that resources raising drones so you can kill them. So I just something that doesn't sit well with me. That's a lot of resources going to waste. But you put frames, the green frame in there that has the bigger drone cell foundation, and you raise drone. And then when the drone are capped, you take that frame out and you put it in the freezer, and then it dies. The mites would prefer to lay in drone cells because they got more room. And so that's the whole object of the drone cell foundation for mite control. Yeah. Yeah. And it's time, you got to be on top of it. Small cell foundation, that's another one. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that either, because as the bees emerge, they leave a little cocoon. So over time, your foundation gets, the cells get smaller and smaller anyways. That's why you need to throw some away after a while. Powdered sugar, they've done research on powdered sugar. You take powdered sugar and you shake it over your hive. Just keep shaking it on there, and the bees go into a cleaning frenzy, and they will able to dislodge a lot of the mites. But again, the research has shown that that's somewhere between 40 and 60% effective by itself. And you need to have a screen bottom board so that the mites would fall down to the ground. Natural oils and foggers. There was research that a guy did in Africa using foggers, and it worked in Africa, but they got different bees, and the bees live different there. It doesn't work in the United States. I tried it for 3 years. I bought those little foggers. They cost $65, and I was fogging all the time, and I'm in there every week trying to fog, and I still lost beehives. Trap the queen and forego egg production. That's another one I think is kind of crazy, but I mean, people do it. You break the cycle apparently, and by trapping the queen and not allowing her to produce. Heat treatments. There's a guy that sells some kind of mat that you put in the hive, and it heats the hive up to, I think it's 105 degrees. It's a real tight window, because if you get too hot, you damage your queen and you'll kill brood. But you heat it up, and that's supposed to kill the mites. And then manage swarming. You're doing splits. You're basically breaking that cycle. If you do a split like I do, and I take the queen out, then that hive is queenless for a period of time, and you kind of break the cycle. Now, I will tell you that any one of those by themselves is not effective. You got to go back to integrated pest management, and you got to use three or four of these at one time. And some of those people that are successful, that's what they're doing. Peggy, there's a husband and wife that live in Southeast Kentucky. I forgot their names, but they're both got PhDs in some kind of biology and stuff, and they don't use any chemicals because they do all this. But you got to be in your hive every week doing this stuff. It's not something you're going to just do, every month. What's that?
I just say not going to happen.
Not going to happen. That's right. As hard as you try, it's like growing fruit. I don't know anybody grow fruit. I've got fruit trees in my yard, and I've been needing to spray those things. And every time I want to spray, the wind's blowing, or it's raining, or it's too cold. So then you go a whole month that you wanted to spray, and they tell you spray every 10 days. I got peaches. You can't spray. You can't spray. There's a whole month gone, and I hadn't sprayed yet. So individually, they're not very effective in the long run. I already said this, and they must be used in combination and a methodical basis. So you need to come up with a system, and you need to be in there doing it on a regular. We talked about the genetics. I'm not sold on it yet. I think there's a lot of work to be done here. But that option's available. There are people that do believe in that, and they go through great lengths. I've spent $250 300 times to get those artificially inseminated queens, and all three of them died. So I got nothing out of them, Yeah. I had a real bad taste in my mouth, I can tell you that. So we're going to talk about chemical treatments because I believe that chemical treatments work. The chemicals we have available to us right now are very effective. One thing I like to say is to buy any pesticide, you need to follow a label. The label is the law. Anything that you put in the hive to kill something else is considered a pesticide. And just about everything that you put in a hive legally is registered with the Environmental Protection Agency. So you need to follow the label. I like to read it and read it again. And almost every year I read it again. And just to kind of remind myself, but timing is very important. And temperature is going to be something that some of these chemicals work better in, and some of them don't work at all. Duration. So, you know, if it says it's got to be in there for 42 days, it needs to be in there for 42 days. If it says you need to do 2 treatments, you know, 14 days apart, that's what you need to do. Intensity. If it says you need 2 strips in the box, then you need to put 2 strips in each box. So a lot of people, you'd be surprised, in my club, they call me the mite killer because I talk about this mite stuff all the time, all summer long. They just get tired of hearing me. And people will, just like y'all, some of you will not listen. You won't do it. And you'll make a mistake. Now, I had a guy, he had a bee yard. He had 15 hives. He had same thing. He had them for several years, and he was treating for mites. And this past year, he went to go treat. He didn't have enough treatment. He ran out of treatment. So he used half treatments. And he came in 4 months later and admitted he lost every single hive. Every single one of them, they died. He didn't treat. The first year he didn't treat. And he said, because I did a half treatment. I didn't have enough. And so I was just trying to, you know, get by with what I had.
One of the points that you have in here, paper bar is the duration, where you talk about 42-day minimum. Then, the legal instructions, that 2-week big off period. If you put paper bar in your hive today, it comes off 2 days before the, or rather, you can't super it until it's 30.
Yeah.
You don't have too much. And I'm saying that because I saw someone who knows a lot better than this thing. They're going to put paper bar in their hive.
Yeah. Yeah. It's 50.
Now, this is going to form.
It's total of 56 days. And you got to get in there day 42 and pull those strips out. And then you got to wait 2 more weeks before you can put your super on. So, you need, so if you didn't get this, you need to think ahead of time. Don't wait until it's time to treat for mites, because you got to be thinking about what temperature it's going to be as to what chemical I can use, or what my wait time is for my supers. Or a lot of people, they want to put supers on in the fall. I put supers on my strong hives in the fall. I get a lot of fall honey. I got 20 gallons of it this year. So I gotta get that window of making my treatment and getting it off of there so I can put my honey supers on. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So it's real important. And so that's what my treatment didn't work. You know, I treated, but I didn't do it right. And it's usually attributed to the beekeeper not following instructions, or not using the appropriate treatment for the time of year, not treating timely, waiting till fall, which is too late to do your primary treatment. Or there could be some other problems that, you could have a weak queen. You could get nosema. Nosema is something that occurs, and now the nosema serrana is the more common one, and that's going to happen actually in the summertime, not this time of year. Not enough food, especially in the fall. If you have a dearth at time, you might need to feed. I've spent $1,000 on feed to feed my hives this past year. There's things that you got to do otherwise besides just the mites, but the mite is a critical part of it. I always like to say, cold weather does not kill bees in a healthy queen white colony. It kills me every time somebody says, the winter took my bees out. The cold weather killed my bees last week. They don't have a clue. Their bees were already dead. They just didn't know it. Okay. So I talked about the pesticides that are being introduced, regulated by EPA. So follow the law. The label is the law. And then chemicals in food is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And so that's actually why we have a lot of these chemicals that can't be used when you're going to have honey supers on. You're getting ready to put honey supers on, because you can't have that chemical in your honey. And that's what will happen. There's soft chemical formulations that are really derived from these natural products I'm going to talk about. And then there's harder synthetic chemical formulation, which the most common synthetic one is going to be the Apivar, which is the white strip. That's synthetically made pesticide. Most of the rest of them that we're used to are some type of essential oil or an acid. So let's talk about them. So one of my favorite ones is Formic Pro or Mite Quick Strip. made by the same company. It looks exactly the same, and it's applied almost the same. It has a little different timing. You can do 2 treatments, like 10 days apart. I wouldn't do that. It's too much work. You got to take the hive apart to put it in there. It comes in a little pouch, sealed pouch. You cut the pouch open. It has a very strong smell. You're supposed to wear gloves. You're supposed to wear some kind of a mask. You don't want to be opening it up and sniffing it, because it'll burn your nostrils. And then you lay it on the hive. You have to put the strips between 2 boxes. So if you got a double box like most of us have, you have to take the box apart and then put these in there. So this is just a half a box, but you lay one there like that, and you lay the one over here. Usually I put one like that and then one like that. Okay, and get it all ready, because as soon as you place that on there and put those bees are coming out. They don't like this stuff. It's real strong. It gives off a big strong cloud of odor. That's what it does. And you need to get that in there and already have your other box ready and set it on top of there as quick as you can, because otherwise you'll get bees all around the rim. And then they're coming up that second box. So if you were going to put beetle traps, you better have them all ready, because you better get all that stuff in and shut that box, because they're all coming out. And then when you're all done, they'll be all in the front of that box. And but in a couple hours, they'll go right back inside.
I know it's uncommon, but have you ever lost a queen by the way?
Okay, that's not uncommon. And
I didn't think it was like prevalent, but
I have lost very few queens using this. And here's the thing about it: it's chemical. It's a temperature. It's temperature sensitive. So the manufacturer, when they first came out with it, they said you could use it. I think it was 90 or 92 degrees. Well, now it says 85 degrees. And so what I do, I use this in June. Okay. And so I wait for a cold front. Okay. We have them in June, and the temperature will drop down to the 70s. And so I got my honey supers on, and that's usually the first or second time that I'm coming to pull honey. So I go there to pull honey. Anyway, I'm pulling my honey. I go frame by frame. I only pull the ones out that are capped, and I consolidate the rest, and then I do my treatment. So during that cold front, so it's in the 70s. It might get 79, could get 80 degrees, and it will not kill a queen.
now when it's
At
set
that
to
point.
be, you're still beard on the front.
Oh yeah, initially they're going to beat on the front when you put it in there. They're coming out. Now I have used it. Sometimes you watch the weather, and so I got to go to my bee yard 2.5 hours away, and then next thing you know, it's 80 degrees when I get there, and it gets to be 85 like 2 days later. It's like, oh yeah, it's 79 today, but 2 days later it's 85. So the first 3 days you need to have it less than 85 degrees. That's the key. But if you get it over to a little bit higher than that, you could have a queen kill. Usually they say if it's a weak queen, you'll have a bee kill. You could have 200 bees or more that get killed because of the temperature. So you got to watch the temperature. And so people use this stuff in the summertime. They use it later, and they get a lot of bee kill, and they get queen kills. And so it has a bad name. You hear people say, "I'll never use that again," and blah 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 blah. But you got to use it appropriately. You got to think about it again. So I think it all out. I'm watching the weather like a week ahead of time. I'm watching. I already planned it out. I said, okay, I'm ready to go treat. I've already got my chemical. I bought all my chemicals. I'm not waiting until June to go down to my local, bee place and go buy something that everybody just bought and are sold out. Okay. Huh? What'd you say?
Or it's expired.
Or it's expired. Yeah. The Formit Pro has a 2-year expiration date on it, and the Mite Quick Strip is not. So I think it's 1 year. So that's one of the differences in the formulations. But they look identical. They smell the same. They operate the same. I don't know why they got 2 different versions. Now, here's the most important.
Slow release.
Yeah. So yeah, supposedly. Okay, 10 days versus 14 days. I don't know. I'm not getting it. Because that's what it is. It's 10 days versus 14 days. Now, this is the only chemical that effectively kills mites that are under the cap brood. Okay. And it won't kill all of them, but it kills the majority of them. They say it won't kill the very mature ones that have a hard shell. So you're getting a good kill on every mite that's in that hive. Probably somewhere between 90 and 95% might kill.
Does it actually kill them, or does
It kills them.
sterile?
Well, the older ones, it sterilizes them. That's a good point. That's some of the research. but they're sterilized. They can't reproduce, but it will kill mite.
Place those on a, either top bar or long length.
I have a top bar that at our extension office that we experiment with, and I've done it both. I put it underneath and I put it on top, and it works both ways effectively because I've actually done a count on that hive. Those bees have been in that hive for 4 years now. Same beehive.
That is the biggest benefit of that treatment, though, is that it penetrates cat brood.
Yes, that is the.
Every treatment has pros and cons.
Well, it's two. It kills a cat brood, and it's the only chemical other than Hop Guard,
Well,
which is
technically, can't you use oxalic acid? I don't, but can't you now technically use it with?
well. Okay, so the label doesn't say you can. They never changed the label, so they haven't changed the label. All that FDA said was that having oxalic acid in the hive is acceptable. That's what they said. Okay, but the label doesn't say you could use it. So you make your decision on that. I'm going to tell you, I follow the label, and everything I'm going to talk to you about tonight, I'm following the label. So this is the best chemical you can use with your honey supers on. And so here's the thing. So you go in there and you put this in there in June, wait for a cool front to come through. You'll have a little bit more time. When it's done, it's inert. You don't have to run back in and take it out like you do with the Apivar strip. So you can leave it in there for, another month or so. But I find that I want to get it out there. Next time I go to collect honey, I'm going to get it out there because all that's going to happen is sometimes going to get hotter. And I got to take that box apart to get these things out of there. And those bees are going to be mean. So it dries up, it stays in there. They won't carry it out. It's too much material to carry out, and then it gets hard. So you just open the box, and you can get them out fairly quick and scrape it out of there. Yeah. Well, when they first came out with it, it was kind of messy. And so it didn't go over real well. But actually, the research shows that it's not very effective. It's only about 40 to 60% effective at killing the mite. But it's a holistic. I don't want to say it's organic, but it's basically an organic treatment. So because it's just made out of hop bean.
Does Formic Pro have the highest kill rate?
Oxalic acid is a pretty good killer if you don't have any brood.
Those packets you showed, there's 2 strips of those packets.
Yes.
They'll put the packet as one big gumball.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I've got a slide on that.
And the reason why I say that, if you treat with Formic, say in September, or if it's cool off again, it's too late to requeen that 20% hotter.
Yeah. There's other people that say, this is what they say, is that it doesn't work very well when the humidity's high. So if you wait later in the summertime and you use it, you got a higher humidity, but you also got a higher temperature. So there's no need to wait. If you're going to use it, just use it in June and get your mite kill down, because you're going to get your mite count down. You're going to really knock it down. You're getting a good kill. So, I mean, why wouldn't you do it? It just makes common sense to me. It only costs like, I don't know, $7 a hive. That's a very small investment. Right. But you're not going to kill the queen. If you do it on a cool front and the temperature's right, you're not going to kill that queen. I've done this hundreds of times over the years, and I can only tell you the time that I lost the queen is when it was 88 degrees. I'm using it just in June. You're going to see I have a system. I use it one time in June. The Formic Pro or My Way Quick Strip once a year in June. But that's only one of 5 treatments. Okay, that's only one of 5 treatments. So, so it's a 7-day treatment for the My Way Quick Strip or Formic Pro. It's 14 days. Temperature sensitive. We talked about that. It doesn't work when it's cold, and the package says don't use it when it's over 85 degrees. And it's about $7. I talked about that. You've got to remove your entrance reducer. This is one of the only ones you actually remove the reducer, and you really want to vent a little bit. I use a popsicle stick on the top of my hives under the inner cover, under the outer cover. and you're supposed to cover the bottom screen though. And then the other thing is the reason why I like to use it in June is because those bees need space to get away from it. So I have my honey supers on there. At that point, I still have at least two, most of the time, 4 supers on my hive in June. Okay. So it does tell you on the package not to be feeding. Of course, if you're using it, what I'm telling you, you're not going to be feeding anyway. And the first 3 days are the most critical. So when you put it in there, you can't go back in and open the hive up the next day. You need to stay out of there. Okay. After about 5 days, the chemical has really dissipated and there's not much left in there. But the treatment period is the 10 or 14, the 14 days. It tells you to wear gloves and you should have some kind of eye protection on. I always wear, I don't know why, because you're not going to get it in your eyes other than getting it on your finger and rubbing your eye. And you're probably not going to be doing that when you're putting it in that hive because you're going to have bees everywhere. But it does have a strong fume. It can irritate if you get close to it and smell it. So just kind of a little picture of it. You got to take your hive apart. Those are all you can see right there. I got 4 supers on that hive in the back, and then I got to take it in half. And you can see on the bottom right, those are the 2 strips. They come in that one full pack, 2 strips. You open the full pack and you take those 2 strips out and you lay it down there. And so that's all there is to it. And then 14 days later, it's still there. It looks like that. Those are dried. They're hard. This is all soft right now. It's like a jelly. And it'll get hard and you need a scraper and you scrape them out of there and then put your box back together. The next chemical that I really like, and I use it in the end of July, early August, is Apigard. And Apigard is basically it's thymol. So it's some kind of an essential oil. It's a 30-day treatment. And it needs to be warmer than 60 degrees and less than 105 degrees. And there's some people say it should be less than 100 degrees. There's no wait time after you take it out. So you do the 30-day treatment. Really, it's 28 days, and then you can take it out. And if you were doing it in July, August, and you take it out of there, if you want to put your honey supers on, it's ready to go. So what I do is when I do this treatment, I think about my hives in every apiary, and I usually take my supers off of my strong hive. I put them on my weak hive so I can treat my strong hive. And then I'll go through that 28-day treatment, and then I'll come back and I'll take the supers off those weak hives and put it on my strong hives that I just treated. So now my strong hives are ready to make honey in the fall, and then I'll treat my weak hive. That's how I do it. So I don't treat the whole bee yard at one time. They tell you to do that, but it just, what are you going to do with your supers if they're not fully capped? I mean, by then I've pulled a lot of supers, but I got a lot of supers that got half capped honey. They might not even cap it until October. That's what they did this year. That stuff sat there the whole time. So that's what I do. What other thing I like about it is you got the little package. I get the big bucket because I got plenty of hives. So I get the commercial size stuff, but most people buy these little packages, and it takes one for 14 days and it takes another one for 14 days. So what I do is when I used to use these, I take them and I write the date on there that I put it in that hive. And then I got the other one and I write the date on it when it needs to go in that hive. Okay. And then I kind of help them, I put all this in my iPhone and I got a calendar and I write it on there, multiple things, but 14 days later, I'm going to put the next one in. You take a little full thing and you just pull it back. You don't have to take it off. You just pull it back and you lay this down. Now, I forgot to bring it, but you need a shim. You need about a 1-inch or 2-inch spacer. I take my old beehives and I cut spacers out of them, or you can, build one or whatever. And you lay this on top of the top box, right in the center, just like that. So it's real easy to deploy. You don't have to dig into the hive in August when it's hot and the bees are mad. You just take the top off and you just lay it right in there. And then 14 days later, you take the top off and you take it out and you put a new one in there. So that's what I like about that. A lot of people use Ocba. Then in the Ocba, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. You got to put it down, the strips down in the hive. So you got to take it apart to put them in there, and you got to take it apart to take them out, because you don't want to leave those in there. So that's excuse me. Once you put it in there, it's the same thing. You don't want to open that hive up because it creates an envelope of smell that's going to permeate that hive. And they walk through it, they track it. It's like a gel crystal. If you haven't seen it, it's white, and they'll trap it around in that hive, and it gives off that thymol, and it will kill the mites. It's pretty effective. It's another 90 to 95% treatment. excuse me. They tell you not to use it in the springtime because it can affect brood development. And so that's why it's good to use in July, August, because really the bees aren't really making any brood. It's kind of a slow dead time. It also kills trachea mite, they found. So if you did have some trachea mites, it's going to clean those up. So that's the second treatment I use. First treatment I use is Formic Pro in June. Second treatment I use is with Apogard. Now, some of my hives, like I raise queens, and I have a lot of nukes with queens, and that's not really good for that because I'm in those queen nukes all the time. So I might use Apovar. I'll talk about that in a minute. So the Apogard is thymol. It's colorless. It's crystals. It's used in perfumes. It's used as a mold and mildew preventative. It's as a preservatives in some of our foods. It's an antioxidant. It's for flavor. And so we eating it now. And it's in a lot of facial creams and stuff like that. It's also found in the hive naturally in low doses. That's the same thing with formic acid. I didn't talk about that, but it's a very natural product, and we find that in the hive, and we find that in some of our foods and in perfumes and cosmetics.
What does Simon do to them?
You know, I can't remember. I'm not sure. What's that? Suffocates. This fellow says he thinks it suffocates them. I'm not sure. I need to check on that. It's a good question. I need to know what causes them to die, but it does irritate them, and I think that makes the bee have like a slimy, on their body, and they fall off.
Does it work by the bee carrying it out?
Yeah, they try to track it out. That's right.
I just wondered how it happens.
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm gonna look that up. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can see in the lower right, I've got that little shim. They sell those like at Date Ant. Lower left too. You can see a little, it's like a little 2-inch shim. This one has little bars that go across it. That thing fits in there perfectly. I put those on there in the wintertime to feed winter patties as well. So I use them. I mean, they're effectively used all the time because I'll go and put, 5 patties on my hives in December. And then, I'll come back in the end of January and put some more. So that's what you do is place that on there. You can see you just open the foil open and there's the chemical in there. And then when you come back, it should be empty. There might be a little bit left in there, but you just take it out and put the next one in.
I also want to point out, you don't need those crossbows.
Yeah, I just need the outer rim for the room. They need that room. You need that envelope to be able to, that gas to be able to come out and fall down into the hive and have the bees be able to come up and track into that and have room to do that. And if you try to put that underneath your inner cover, there's just not enough room. You're not going to have a very effective treatment. And that's another reason why some people's treatments don't do very good. They fail because they didn't appropriately apply it.
Probably another reason for want to use it in the spring because they would comb up in there during the
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a bunch of bird comb. So I got this little Swiffer sheet. You can see right there is a beetle blaster. So I always deploy one beetle blaster in all my hives in the summertime as a sentry, and if I start seeing beetles in my blaster, then I might come back and put 2 in. I like these Swiffer sheets, and I always have a Swiffer sheet in every one of my honey supers. And what happens is that what you'll find is that the bees will run those beetles up to the top of the hive or down to the bottom. It's kind of hard to get down there in the bottom, but I've had hives that have a lot of beetles in the hive, and I'll put the Swiffer sheet in the bottom as well. The bees try to pull on it to get it out of there, and they they rough it up a little bit, and then they run the beetles up. The beetles go in there to hide underneath it or inside it. If you fold it over a little bit, and they get caught because they have little hooks on their body, and they get caught in that. Somebody tried to tell me they didn't work, and if I had time, I would have showed you. I've got some of those I had in some hives that have 80 or 90 beetles stuck in them. So they work, they're very effective. I hadn't figured out, if you look at the Swiffer cloth, one side's smoother than the other, and I hadn't quite figured out exactly what side works better. So I always take it and kind of like fold it like a bow, like a bow tie. Unscented Swiffers, and not the Maxis. You just get the regular little box of unscented Swiffers, and you just take those things out and fold them in a bow and put them in the hive. No, I've never had a queen get caught. You will get some bees get caught in there, but usually not more than about 5 or 6. I put, I don't like to have oil in my supers because I'm just notorious for, spilling it. So I put these in, if I have beetles, I'm going to put it in every super. If I don't have a lot of beetles, I'll just put it in the top super.
On top of the frame.
Sits right on top of the frame, just like that. Just like you see it right there. Just sits right on top of the frame.
Would you put one for each super, so if you had 4 supers on a hive?
If I go and I see my little sentry I always use the beetle blaster, because that just works. And if I see beetles in there, several beetles, I'm saying, then I'm going to put Swiffers in every one of my supers.
Everyone.
Yeah. You won't catch a lot in the other ones. You'll catch most of them in the top, because the bees run them up, and they run up trying to get away, and they get up to the top, and they get underneath that. But it's cheap, and it's very effective. And I haven't lost a hive to beetles in several years. I can't even remember, 10 years probably.
Using the Apicar, if you use the screen inner cover, would you replace those with more solid inner cover?
The screen inner cover on the top. You still got an outer cover, right? Yeah, no, I wouldn't worry about the screen inner cover on the top. But if you got a screen bottom board, they tell you to close that off, because that chemical envelope's going to drop down, and if you got the bottom open, it's just going to go out into the ground. You're going to lose that envelope. It needs to be stuck in that box.
It's technically fumigate.
Yeah, fumigate. And then this is the bulk. If you had a lot of bees like I have, or some of y'all have, you get the bulk container, and then you measure it out with the little 50 milliliters plunger, and then you have I'm poking over here and you guys can't see me, and they give you these little cardboard things. You just squirt it out, and it's the same application. It's going to be 14 days apart. So cover your screen bottom, slightly reduce your entrance. Kind of hard to do in the summertime. I don't really reduce my entrance. I don't see that to be very effective, but that's what they tell you to do. And stay out of hive during treatment time. A lot of people want to feed. This particular chemical, I don't think it tells you can't feed, but if you're going to feed, you need to get the feed in there, and then treat, and then don't go back in, because you're going to destroy that envelope of that fumigate.
The main concern about feeding when you have this on is the bees might be distracted.
Right.
If they're not going to feed it.
Not go to that chemical. Yeah. That's you're exactly right.
So when I use this, I need it to come out. That when you put it on.
I put mine on specifically at the end of July or early August, and because that's the last time you have the opportunity to get that mite population down before it peaks. So we traded in June. I traded in June, so I got low mite count again, and I'm gonna come in there end of July, early August. I'm gonna treat with it.
But you're pulling your supers off, putting this on.
Yeah, I'm pulling the supers off. My weak hives first, treating them. My strong hives first, treating them, and then I'm going to come back 28 days later, and I'm going to treat the other hives.
You might put that on after
I will put it on my strong hive.
if we get a fall flow.
Yeah, I'm going to put them on, whether we do or not. Because when I got supers, I got honey supers that aren't capped. Okay, they could be 3/4 full, they could be half full. So what am I going to do with them? Everyone says, what do I do with them? You could take them out and you could let the bees rob them. People put them in the freezer. I'm not sure why, because they're not done. And all that stuff does is just freeze. It turns to crystal in the freezer. So I take them off. I put them on my strong hives. I treat my weak hives. And then 28 days later, I'm sorry. I take them off my strong hives, put them on my weak hives. I treat my strong hives. Then 28 days later, I take those supers and I put them back on my strong hives. The weak hives, they didn't do anything with those supers. They might even ate some, but at least they kept them. They kept them clean. They kept them pretty much protected. There's usually enough bees to keep the beetles populations down. So now I can take those supers and put them on the strong hive and let them finish it up with fall flow.
I know you said you're late. Have you seen any evidence on recommend you're doing 50 grams for the 14 days versus 25 grams
Yeah, and there is something in the label about that, doing lower application rates during high temperatures. It's in the label. You can do that. And some of the commercial guys do that. Rick Sutton, just to use him, he advocates that, and he was advocating that a lot. So I went and looked it up because I didn't remember seeing that. But yes, it is on the label, and you can do that. Put lower doses every 7 days, so you can do that. Yeah. So if it's in your backyard, I mean, that's no big deal. You can do it. But again, like me, if I'm going to go down to Morgan County, which is 2.5 hours away, I'm not coming back in 7 days to retreat that hive. Bad enough, I got to go back in 14 days. I haven't done it. I haven't done this. I mean, kind of what you said to start with. I just follow the main label and I just use it 14 days. It works. It works fine for me. I haven't had any bee losses. I haven't had any queen losses like people talk about from the chemical. I haven't seen that. Now, people say that they have had queen losses. I suspect that they just had a weak queen. That would be my theory. You know, I think there's a lot more, you know, crappy queens out there than we want to recognize. People just don't want to admit it. You just got, you know, a lot of poorly mated queens. They run out of egg, or they just don't lay a lot of eggs. They're not very big. You know, the size of your queen is going to determine how many eggs she can hold and how much she can lay. So you need to spend more time paying attention to your queens than we probably have. That's kind of what I've learned.
When you move the super, are you putting the bees out? Are you moving with the house?
No, I push them out. I use the fume board because I'm going to be harvesting honey anyway. So I use a fume board. I don't know if y'all use that. It's a little cover that's got felt on the inside, and you spray that bee gone. And then you put it on there. It works better when it's hot and the sun shines on it. It pushes them down pretty quick. I got a couple of them, and I'll work on one, and then I'll go on another one. So I try to push all the bees down out of those supers back to the hive that they came from. That's a good question. So the other chemical that we can use is the Ocba, and it comes in a little package like this, and it's a little plastic strip. They come all attached. There's actually 2 strips right there. So you got to tear them apart. This is a synthetic chemical, man-made. It's as we talked about, the 42-day treatment, and the chemical that's called is amitraz. It's been around for quite a while, but it's probably one of the newer chemicals on the market for bees. I say newer. It's been around. We've been using bees for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. It's very effective. Also, generally, 95% is what they say a mite kill, but it won't kill any mites that's under the cap. And that's why it's in there for so long. It gives off a very low dose of the chemical over a long period of time. The bees track on it. They track the chemical around inside the hive. And that's why it takes so long to kill the mite. Basically, you're waiting on the mites to hatch out. And so it's going through all the mite cycle. If it's 24 days for the drones to hatch, you're going through 2 full cycles of hatch out in the hive. That's the same thing with the Ocba. That's why it's in there for 28 days, is because it's going through the whole cycle of the bees. Every bee in the hive that was in there as a pupa or younger is hatching out, and it's killing the mite as it comes out on the bee. We talked about this quite a bit already about the 42-day treatment. Having to wait 14 days to put supers on. The one nice thing about this chemical is it's not very temperature dependent, so you can use it when it's real hot, you can use it when it's cool. I use it a lot in my queen nukes because it doesn't talk about not opening the hive and going in there. It doesn't really create that fume envelope in the hive. So it's a little bit safer, and it goes between the frames. And so if I'm doing, I got double box, you got to put 2 per box. So it's 4 total. And usually I'll put 1 right here. And on the other side of the box, I'll put 1 right there. So I stagger it. And then on the second box, I'll put 1 right here and I'll put 1 right there. So that I got a good distribution of the strip in the box. It has a little tab on the top of it. Can you see that? It took me a while to figure it out, maybe 2 years, but you push that tab up like that, and when you push it between the two frames, that holds it from falling in. So that's, I mean, it's pretty slick. And then when you want to take it out, then you can just go in there with your hive tool and hook it up and pull it out. You don't want to leave these in, unlike the Mite Quick Strip or Formic-Fleur where it goes inert. You want to pull these out after the 42 days because it has a low dose of the chemical. And it could still have some chemical in there is what they say. And so the other mites that start hatching out later on could become resistant to the chemical. Okay.
Have you ever had a number?
No, I've never had that. And so there's kind of a picture of the deal, and that's the little tab you see right there that holds the thing from falling in if you push it up. 2 per box at 4. It's the most expensive of all of them. $14 per hive. The Mite Quick Strip is I think $7.
I'm wondering if you have to adjust that, like from 8 frames, or you got unit box, you got 10 frames.
Yeah, if you had an 8 frame, you would still use 2 per box. On a nuke, you would just need to have, if it's usually a single nuke, you could do 1. It's like 1 per 5 frames, basically.
So, top bar, like
Yeah, so it's,
every so many.
yeah, I would go. If you had 10 frames, you would use 2 of them. You know, and so you have to think about. That's a good question. You know, how long is your top bar and how many? You know, where do you have brood? If you think about it, a lot of times in our hives, most of our brood's in the center, right? You know, the outside has honey and pollen, and then the bees are all in the center. But you're literally looking at that distribution of the volume of bees in a box by how much you want to use. But basically, most of these chemicals tell you to go by box. They're not really looking at, well, how many bees do you have?
Yeah, how big is the box,
Yeah,
or how many frames you got?
yeah. But an 8 frame and a 10 frame, you would use 2 per box. And I would say a minimum of 2 on a top bar.
Okay,
It could be 4 if you had a lot of,
one per box per minute.
yeah. I use the Ocba bar. I use it sometimes. I use it in my nukes. You know, even though I'm pulling brood and, you know, breaking it and, you know, all that kind of stuff, I just put it in there in the, yeah, in the summertime. I use it in my nukes that I have my queens in because that's the only nukes I have at that point in time. And sometimes, like if I go over to my Morgan County hive and I don't know if I'm going to get back in 2 weeks, I may use it over there in the hives that I don't have honey supers on, because I might have a couple of hives that just I know they're not going to get. I'm not going to get a fall flow. I'm not going to get a fall flow over there anyway. We got a completely different flow over there that we have here. So I'll use it in some hives. I may have some real weak hives, and I might use it in those instead of using one that creates fume, just because I think it's less irritating on the bees. Sometimes, if I go in a hive and I see a lot of beetles, there's a reason why those beetles are in there. I either got a weak queen or I got mites. So I can either do a mite count, and usually that's when I decide to do a mite count. If I see a hive that's got a lot of beetles, that's when I'll do a mite count, just for the heck of it, just because I want to see if I'm right. And usually you'll have a high mite count. That's when I'll do the count. Oxalic acid. Some people think this is the save all, to do everything, the only chemical that you need. And most people that are doing that are doing it in October, and it's too late. If you wait till October to do your treatment, you're too late because the damage has already been done. And so, and there's guys that do it like 5 or 6 treatments, like 5 days apart or 7 days apart. I see all kinds of stuff on Facebook. The manufacturer on the label tells you that you use this stuff during the time that the bees are broodless, because it only kills those mites that are exposed. It won't kill any mite that's under the cap. And it's not unlike these other chemicals that are in there for anywhere from 10 days to 14 days to some of them 30 days, the other one 42 days. That's a one-shot deal. It really kills all the mites in a matter of about 48 hours. What it does is well, you can use a liquid or you can use the vaporizer. The vaporizer creates these crystals, micro crystals that form on the bees and form inside the hive. And it's very effective at killing the mites. But if you have cat brood, it's not going to kill those mites. And so they tell you to wait till there's there's no brood. So that's going to be sometime in November, varies on the year. This year there was bees brewed in there into December. And I treated this year in December. I like to usually do it in November. If we have a cold November, then I'm gonna do it in November, because my theory is the earlier the better. Get the mites killed. This year I did it in December, and then this is the first year that I came back and I did it in January. First time I did 2 treatments. But that's really what I call a cleanup treatment. That's going to be, at the end of the year kind of thing, to go ahead and clean all the mites up that you can, so that your hive going in the winter has a low mite count. And then you just hope that your bees didn't go rob somebody else's hive that collapsed. It's very cheap, 40 cents a hive. And so somewhere between November, December, January is when you want to use it. If this is the only chemical that you're using for your mite control, you're not going to make it. Okay. Now, the University of Florida, that guy there, Cameron Jack, he's done a lot of studies on this oxalic acid. And somebody pointed out, of course, he's in Florida, they got a different environment, and the bees never go broodless. But they find that if you just do those shot treatments like that, you'll just have the same mites, a few weeks later that you had before. So you're not getting a reduction. You're just keeping the same level. So you still got mites in there, and they're going to increase. Okay. So, and again, it's an acid. It's found everywhere in the environment. It's in spinach. That's a real common. All your green leafy vegetables like that have oxalic acid in it. It's a natural part of our diet. It's in the hive. It's in the comb. It's not going to build up in wax. That's one good thing about it. And the FDA has now said that any amount that's found in honey is acceptable. Now, I will say, with that being said, I've done a lot of work with pesticides in my career, and this is one of the very few pesticides that have a skull and crossbones on it. So it kind of scares you. That used to be like death, right? Poison. It is poisonous. They tell you to wear a respirator like this, not just a COVID mask. Want to wear one like this with the chemical cartridge on it. And then you're supposed to wear some kind of gloves and glasses, because if you use a vaporizer and you breathe that stuff into your lungs, it can damage your lungs permanently. Those crystals will develop in your lungs, and it'll kill those uli, whatever that word they use, in your lungs. So you want to use that. You use if I had a bottom board here, you use this little vaporizer. There's many kinds of vaporizers. This is this one I got here recently. That's the 12-volt one, and you measure the chemical. It's a crystal, real small crystals that you measure out. Comes in that package. It also comes in a little bottle like this, kind of smaller than sugar. You can hear it. And you measure it out, and you put it in a little thing, and you put this on there, and you put it in the bottom board. Actually, now I'm drilling holes. Oh, here's the measure. And you push this in there, and then I take a wet towel and I put it in the front of the hive to close it off. You want to trap, and what it does is it takes that chemical and it atomizes it. Subdelineation is what it's called, and it changes it from that solid into a gas, and it creates smoke. And then the smoke goes in the hive and gets under every crevice and creates those little crystals. Now the bees don't like this stuff. So what I do first is I try to smoke a little bit, push the bees up, because you put this thing in there and they'll get mad and they'll attack it. You'll burn a couple of bees. This is another one right here. You'll end up with some dead bees on that thing. It gets hot, and so then this one shuts off by itself. You hook it up to a battery. There's some that hook up to electricity that work better. And then you wait, about 10 minutes. I've got a couple of them. I just go do the other hives and rotate them around and bring a couple of batteries with me. And then eventually I'll pull that thing out. I'll leave the cloth there, and then eventually you'll take the cloth up. And then there'll be I like to do it when it's about 40 degrees outside, because that's all the bees are inside. If you're out there when it's 50 degrees, you've got some bees out flying, and a bunch of them are coming back trying to get in there. I don't know if they get back in there and get in that crystal, if it kills the mites on them or not. But you want as many in the hive as you can. If you don't want to use that thing, you can use the dribble method with like a syringe, when you actually mix the chemical, it has the recipe with sugar water, a real thick syrup. I think it's 2-to-1 and or 1-to-1. And then you have to take the boxes apart though. So here you are, you got to pick a 50-degree plus day. You got to take your boxes apart. And I hate to do that because you're going to break the propolis seal. And then you take this and you squirt it right between the frames, right on top of the bees. You would think that wouldn't be right. And you do it real quick. So you got to get used to it. You go, and then you do 5 frames where all the bees are in the center of that box. And then you go to the top box if there's bees in there and you do that, but you put 50 milliliters in there. So, about 5 milliliters per each of those slots. And, I did this for a couple years and I didn't lose any queens, any bees. No, I mean, I don't know how they did it, but they ate all that stuff up and, it works very effectively. If you got 1 or 2 hives, that's probably the way to go. Okay. I was going to say something. I forgot what it was.
I think one tip for everybody, I've made a habit, like if I get a swarm call and I go out and get a swarm and I bring it into my apiary, I go ahead and hit them with around the box of the gas.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. What I do is I got a sugar water mixture and I got one of those plant misters and I got a little ball of bees up there I'm going to catch. I just spray them right there. And they got all that honey on them. I mean, that sugar water on them. I mean, they're already calm, but they're even calmer now. And so when I drop them in the box, they already got that stuff on them.
But I have one swarm, that I caught, it was a large swarm, and I went ahead and shot it around on silk acid, and I counted 200 mites on the ice.
There you go.
At least I knocked it off.
I got a whole bunch of them. These end up getting hot and then they come off the rod. That don't last very long. I got another one some guy made and it's got a VW heater on the end of it. And that came apart. This one I got off of Amazon. It's a Chinese made deal and it's only $125. And I like it. It works pretty good. I don't think it, yeah, it works off batteries. I don't think it gets hot enough. But it will get hot enough and it'll sublineate and everything, but sometimes it's got a little bit of chemical in there that what's that? Yeah, see, this one's got some chemical still in it. Yeah. Yeah. What'll happen is on this one, the little pipe will get plugged up. So you got to check on that every couple times you use it. Yeah, those are expensive.
I think it's
400.
cheaper than what's the brand anymore?
Oh yeah, probate. Yeah, that one takes 110 volt, and the one you're talking about takes a 20 volt DeWalt battery.
Well, they have that one, but I have the.
Oh, do you? Okay.
I think it's about
Yeah. 100. No, I think it's 300, somewhere around $300. Yeah, because I'm looking at it. I'm going to buy one. I'm going to buy my next purchase. I'm going to buy the battery one that.
What's the name? Dave Hansberry has the battery.
That's the most expensive one.
Yeah. So, and then just the last thing is research has shown that repeated use of the chemical actually weakens the exoskeleton of the bee. And so, I mean, every time you're using it on your queen, I mean, we were talking about that earlier. I mean, can you get a queen that dies or does it do something to it? I have had queen losses using that vaporizer. More queen losses using the vaporizer than using the Formic Pro. So now this year I didn't lose any. I think I told you earlier, 35 hives. I didn't lose any hive. I haven't lost any queen. And I've been checking them recently. I've been running all around checking my hives, feeding them again because they're running out of feed, by the way. So here they're going to be stuck in there for the next 2 weeks with no feed and thousands of mouths in there to feed. So we just talked about the safety things to use, the goggles and the gloves. And I can't emphasize that enough. If you're going to use the vaporizer, to use this mask. If you're going to use the dribble thing, you don't need this mask. You just need a little COVID mask when you mix it up, because you take that little chemical, those crystals, and you got to weigh them out. to put in your sugar water. And so if you only got a couple of bees and you look on the package, it tells you to use the whole package, you know, for like a half a gallon of liquid. Well, that's going to do 25 hives. I think that's what it is. You don't have 25 hives, you got 3. So you need to do the math and break it down of the ratio so that you just mix up what you need. And then you can save the rest. It'll last indefinitely, last forever. So, yeah, 1 bottle treats 35 hives, not 25. Some people use a fogger. We're talking about using the fogger for mineral, and there's some people that been using a fogger for this oxalic acid, but there's nothing in the label that tells you to do that. There's not really a fogger that can tell you, can distribute the amount of chemical that's needed to treat the hive. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but yeah, dispense it at a certain dosage, the dosage. So we know with this, we can measure out 2 of these, and that's what the manufacturer says is going to be effective, whether you do it with the oxalic acid vaporizer or you do it with the dribble method. The dribble method is going to tell you to use 50 milliliters, but you're going to mix it up. But using a vaporizer, there's no information in the manufacturer's literature as to a dosing rate. When you're going to fog it, how do you know how much to fog it? You know, how do you know how much you're getting in there? Is it enough? That's the question. So, and so I kind of showed you here locally right here on the spot, what we're using. Do not inhale the dust when mixing or the vapor when applying it. So one thing I want to say is a lot of new people or people that haven't been using chemicals are afraid of the chemicals because they've never used them before. And I get that. So get with somebody, you guys got some good people in your club. I know some of them. So get with a mentor and go out with them. Maybe the club can do a demonstration at somebody's bee yard, but learn how to put the chemical in and use it. It's not going to kill you, and it's generally not going to kill your bees. And you're going to end up having less bee loss using the treatment methods that are available to us than by doing nothing. So, so the hop guard, I just hit on that real quick, 45 to 85% effective. So if you want to use a non-chemical treatment, that would be the one. But you would want to use do some mite counts before and after treatments, so that you feel confident that you got the mite count down to the 2% or less. And you might have to, depends on when you do the mite count too, by the way. You know, if you're doing a mite count in June, when you got 40,000 bees in the hive and they're outgrowing the mites, your count's going to be acceptable. But if you do a mite count in October, that's going to be another story. Okay. Apistan and check mite, they're actually still selling a lot of that stuff, but that's been already shown that the mites are not already have resistance to those chemicals. So quit using them. I guess they assume that some people are using the Apistan for beetle control to kill beetles. It's pretty expensive stuff. So I think there's check mite, yeah. I think there's you know, better ways to control beetles than buying that stuff because it's expensive. It was yeah, it contaminates your comb. So again, use the appropriate treatment for the time of year, the temperature, brood development. I already told you that Apogard affects brood development, so that's not one you want to use in the springtime, and whether you got supers on the hive or not. If you're going to treat when you got supers on the hive, then you're limited to Mite Quick Strip or Formic Pro, or the Hop Guard. Those are the only ones that are labeled. And so do a mite count before and after treatment is what's recommended. And that's the checker that I was talking about earlier. So you can buy one of those and then you just use alcohol. You can see, there's your mite. That's how tiny they are compared to that pencil tip. And there's a lot of good information on all this mite treatment on the Honeybee Health Coalition. I recommend that you get the American Bee Journal or Bee Culture because they got some really good articles in there. There's usually 3 or 4 that are research orientated, and then there's some other ones that you know, people talk about their business. So that's all I got. So I'm treating in June with Mite Quick Strip or Formic Pro. I'm treating in July and August with Apogard is my primary one. On some of my hives, I might use the Apivar. And then I'm doing a oxalic acid treatment in November, December, and then another one in January. And I've been doing this now, my treatments now for like this for 6 years. And 6 years running, my average hive loss is about 12%. And this year I was 0. That's the first year I got 0. So I attributed the 0 to the January treatment and Better Queen.
What other environments do these mites live?
That's about it. I gave a presentation to some beginners and they were scared out of their bejesus when I talked about all these mites and they thought their kids were going to get them and they were going to get on their dogs. And that's a good question. I mean, you're like, you know, what, that's what hive beetles only live in a hive. You know, I mean, they'll live in the ground, but I mean, they're only going to parasite on a hive, in a hive, and the mites only parasite on the bees. Now, what's happening now, some of the people that are, you know, into native bee protection feel that the honeybees is a threat to our native bee populations because they're finding some of the mites on native bee populations, and now they're starting to see 2 of the viruses on native bee populations, in native bee populations. So it will live in other bees, native bee populations. But as far as we know, that's the only place that they are on bees.
What got them started?
Well, I came from another country. Where'd they come from? Europe, Asia. Yeah, I don't know what started them there, but
Originally, they were a pest of Aphis cerana.
Cerana.
That's what the thing was they keep it like Vietnam. In India and parts of southern Russia, that weird band of Russia where they look like Asians, is that southern Russia. But they transitioned over to the European honeybees, and that was in the 60s or so that happened. And then they eventually spread out over Asia and Europe. And they were, and they are wholesale destroying colonies within like an 8-mile radius. And
Yeah.
setting up poison feeding stations to kill any feral colonies. The product is that might. That's the only place in the world that not happen.
And the other interesting thing I heard recently in a presentation is that the beetles are now carriers of 2 of the viruses. What's that?
You know what viruses they are?
No, I don't. I just something I heard in a talk the other day. It wasn't actual, just specifically on that. And you know, my question would be though, how does the virus get from a beetle back to the bee? You know. So, thank you for your time. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, walkaway split does a break in the brood cycle, so it's supposed to break the mite cycle. You're welcome.